listening comprehension?
What is listening comprehension? Well, that's really a two-part question about listening and about comprehension. And comprehension is a process of constructing meaning. It's an inferential process. And the knowledge used to make those inferences of two types: linguistic knowledge, which would be like knowledge of vocabulary, grammar, discourse, etc., and non-linguistic knowledge, which would be like knowledge of the context or the co-text, or the content or general background knowledge. And as for what listening is, the important thing to understand is that spoken language is very, very different from written language. Three ways it differs. We need to get these very clear. Firstly, it comes through sound, and that means that the listener must know the sound system and must also know how the sound system is modified in fast, rapid speech, so they have to understand the phonological system as well. Secondly, the structure of spoken discourse is very different. I mean, people don't speak in sentences as they do in written language. We can think of them speaking more in something, let's call them idea units, which might be just a few words long, last a couple of seconds, and probably are just one sort of intonation contour. And these idea units are strung together rather loosely. I mean, there's not so much embedding. There's a lot of non-standard language, slang, idioms, new expressions, of course, dialect. There are disfluencies. People hesitate a great deal. They correct what they say. They false starts and so on and so forth. And the whole structure of the discourse, how the ideas are arranged together, is done differently. And the third characteristic of spoken language that listening testers must be aware of is the fact that it takes place in real time. You look at a piece of reading, you can go back and read it again. You can't do that with listening. It's fast and fleeting, which means two things. It means that processing has to be automatic. There's no time to think about it. It has to be quite automatic. And when it's finished, the only thing that's left is a memory. There's nothing else left.
Well, how should we go about testing listening comprehension?
How should we test listening comprehension? Well, firstly, there are two problems we have to consider, and these have a tremendous influence. There is no product of listening comprehension, or the product's in the mind. I mean, we can't examine a piece of comprehension. So what we have to do is give the comprehender some task. And then based on their performance on that task, we make inferences about their comprehension. So it's an indirect process, and the task always requires particular skills. So our test is always sort of confounded with other skills. And the other problem with listening is that listening takes place for a number of different purposes, and because it's an inferential process, it's quite possible for different people to have different interpretations of the same text, and those interpretations all to be reasonable. There's something else. We also need to decide about the type of interaction. Most listening in the real world takes place in some sort of interaction. There's a speaker and there's a listener, and very often they change roles. Or there can be situations where there's one dominant speaker but the listener can interrupt, and then at the other end of this continuum there are people who listen to radio. We all do that, and that's not interactive. We have to decide where on that continuum of interactiveness we are going to make the test. Virtually all listening tests test non-interactive listening, because that's just the easiest way to do it. Also, interaction can be for two purposes, either to convey information or to establish social relationships, and we call this transactional language use to provide information, and interactional language use for social interaction. Most listening tests test transactional language use, and I think you're well advised to do the same thing. And I have one strategic recommendation. Of course, the purpose of the test will determine how people do it, but listening comprehension has a tremendous amount of overlap with reading comprehension, and Testing listening is just much more complex and difficult, largely because you've got to mess around with tapes and tape recorders and speakers and so on and so forth. And there's a technical side to that that's difficult to do. My recommendation is that if you want to test general language comprehension, you better doing it with reading. When you test listening, you get more bang for the buck if you concentrate on those aspects of listening that you can't test any other way, those unique aspects of listening. And that really means you're better testing fast, automatic processing of realistic spoken texts.
Well, what tasks or item types should we use?
Well, there's a wide selection, and I can't go through them all here, but let me just mention one or two. Dictation is very popular. Dictations are easy to make, they're relatively easy to mark, they often make reasonable tests, but they test a very narrow range of skills in my view. Similarly, we can make sentence evaluation activities, or statement evaluation activities I should say. We give people a statement and they either evaluate the truth of it and say yes or no, or we give them some sort of picture and make statements about the picture and they evaluate them, or something like that. These are easy to make, they're very fast, very easy to administer, but again they test a very narrow range of skills. If we want to test listening to longer discourses or more deeper levels of comprehension, I think we have to use comprehension questions. Short answer comprehension questions are easier to make. They're much easier than multiple choice questions, and they're highly recommended. Other people, I mean, closed tests don't work for listening, but other people have suggested the closed technique can be adapted. You can make a summary of a passage and then delete some of the most important information in there, and this becomes a gap-filling task, and have people fill these in. And that sort of thing. And I like what some people call information transfer items, where you have people either make pictures or evaluate pictures or select pictures or fill in grids after hearing a text or do things with diagrams and that sort of thing. You can do lots of interesting things with that.
And what about testing communicative listening?
Well, communicative is a buzzword in our field, as we know, and this is really a very complex question, but I just want to say that communicative testing really means better testing. I mean, when we're talking about testing communicative skills, we're talking about testing a broader construct, and so we're really talking about the listening construct and how we should define and operationalize that. And I think we can think of listening, it helps to think of listening in two ways. We can think of comprehending the explicit linguistic information, what's clearly stated, or we can think of comprehension in terms of interpreting the meaning of that in a broader context, either a broader communicative context. It's very easy, or relatively easy, to test understanding explicitly stated information. It becomes very, very difficult when we want to test inferencing and implications and appropriacy in a context. What I would recommend is, okay, let me define what I think is a basic core construct that could be used, that falls somewhere between these two definitions of listening. We can consider listening comprehension as understanding extended samples of realistic language and processing these automatically and in real time. And that means understanding all the linguistic information that's unequivocally included in there, and also understanding any inferences or implications that are unambiguously implicated by the content or the context. That's a very good construct and definitely testable. We can then build on that if it's possible. For example, if we know something about the target's language use situation, we can add elements of that. For example, if we want to test academic listening, well, we can use academic tests texts and have tasks that are typical, or we can just use more realistic texts and tasks to whatever way we can. But if we can't improve on this basic core construct, I don't think that's very bad at all. I think we can still have very good tests just by doing that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.